All right, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. I'm Poppy Harlow. Jim Sciutto has the day off. He is flying back from his special coverage in Hanoi. Meantime, the president is back home from his no-deal summit with Kim Jong-un, only to face disturbing new questions about his stewardship of the nation's most sensitive intelligence. Well, this morning, the New York Times and the Washington Post are both reporting that in May of last year, the president personally ordered his then clearance. Kelly then overruled the persistent and long-standing objections of career White House security screeners and wrote about it in a memo. And months later, the president denied any of it ever happened. Listen.
Do you tell General Kelly or anyone else in the White House to overrule security officials, the career?
No, I don't think I have the authority to do that. I'm not sure I do, but I wouldn't do it. Jared's a good. I was never involved with the security.
That's Maggie Haberman's interview with the president. The House Oversight Committee has been requesting specific documents and interviews relating to White House security clearances for more than a month now, and last night threatened to subpoena them if they don't come soon. Also, House Democrats are not done yet with Michael Cohen. After 3 straight days of testimony before 3 separate congressional committees, the president's former lawyer and confidant is coming back next Wednesday for more closed-door Q&A with the House Intelligence Panel. So let's begin there. Joe Johns is at the White House this morning. 2 reports, 2 separate papers, a lot of good reporters on these bylines here. And the White House is not denying directly these reports about the president mandating that Kushner get this top-secret security clearance.
Right, and nothing so far from the president indicating otherwise. Look, there are a couple questions raised by this New York Times reporting. The first is, what is it in Jared Kushner's background that has raised these issues in the first place? We've never gotten to what specifically that is, and even people in Capitol Hill have been asking. But there are some other questions as well, including those memos to the file from John Kelly, Don McGahn, the White House counsel. What's that about? Contemporaneous recollections of events. Still not clear. But perhaps the most important thing is the question of candor. The president himself has said he was going to leave this up to John Kelly, the then chief of staff. Of course, Kelly says it was the president who ordered him to give the security clearance to Jared Kushner. And even Jared Kushner's wife has said, in fact, that it was the president who had nothing to do with this. Listen.
The president had no involvement pertaining to my clearance or my husband's clearance.
Pretty much a flat denial right there. The lawyer for Jared Kushner, Abby Lowell, very well known in Washington, has said essentially that there's nothing to see here. He put out a statement through his spokesman. Here's what it says. In 2018, White House and security clearance officials affirmed that Mr. Kushner's security clearance was handled in the regular process with no pressure from anyone that was conveyed to the media at the time. And news stories, if accurate, do not change what was affirmed at the time. So, as you know, House Democrats have been all over this issue for quite some time. Elijah Cummings, the chairman of the Reform and Oversight Committee, has said he might issue a subpoena if he doesn't get the information he needs. Poppy, back to you.
That's right. Joe Johns at the White House, thanks so much. Let's talk about this and what it could mean going forward. Sarah Murray is with me, CNN political correspondent. Also, Sean Turner, our national security analyst and former director of communications for U.S. National Intelligence. Good morning to you both. So, Sean, happening this morning, as happens every morning there at the White House, the president is getting the intelligence reports, right? The presidential daily briefing. And I'm interested in what you think those intelligence officials that deliver that are thinking right now, knowing this.
Yeah, for a long time, Poppy, there was concern in the intelligence community over exactly how Jared Kushner got his security clearance. And to your point, one of the things that's really disturbing about this is, as this morning, as you said, as individuals are receiving that presidential daily briefing, Jared Kushner has a top secret SCI clearance. That means a clearance that it allows him to see secure compartmented information, including the president's daily briefing. So for individuals who are delivering that briefing, this is the most sensitive, classified information that we have. The idea that Jared Kushner would be able to see this information, considering all of the background and the concerns over why he could not receive a security clearance, is quite disturbing. And I've talked to people this morning who said that they really are in shock that this is the way he received his clearance.
Sarah, we just heard Ivanka Trump, an advisor to the president as well as his daughter, say, the president had nothing involved in my security clearance in that ABC interview a few weeks ago. it is possible, isn't it, that she and perhaps even Jared Kushner didn't know this, right? That the president gave this order to John Kelly in a room where they weren't and never told them. Possible?
Sure. I mean, I guess that's possible. I think that would mean, okay, that Ivanka Trump wasn't lying and maybe Jared Kushner's attorney wasn't lying, but that then the president was lying. So in any way you square it, someone was lying about the situation, the way that this was done, assuming this New York Times report is accurate, which frankly, you know, people were writing these contemporaneous memos at the time. There's no reason to believe it's not accurate. I mean, you can see right here in this timeline all the issues that Jared Kushner had to go through to get a security clearance, all of the different ways they mishandled the paperwork to begin with, the fact that his attorneys were out publicly in May of 2018 saying this is taken care of, only to find out in July of 2018 that in fact there were still issues, and now we're finding out that these issues were so concerning to other folks who were in the White House that they wrote memos at the time to document it. So, you know, this is one of those things, Poppy, where you look back at it and you just wonder what the White House thought they were going to accomplish by lying about this, and if they really thought that it was never going to get out there, that this was done over the objection of top people working in that administration.
And Sean, you know, there's also the risk of other countries, adversaries, you know, taking advantage of this. We'd known as early as last year that at least 4 countries had discussed ways that they could possibly manipulate Jared Kushner to their advantage. The Washington Post talks about those discussions centering around any vulnerabilities with complex financial dealings, for example. And the countries we're talking about that the Post reported out: the UAE, China, Israel, and Mexico. How significant?
It's extremely significant, Poppy. I mean, look, this is, a lot of people have said to me, you know, what's the big deal? The president has the authority to give Jared Kushner a security clearance. But here's the issue. We understand how our adversaries use information against individuals with security clearance when there's information that they can leverage. Yeah. So what we're doing is we're looking at Jared Kushner, someone who has clearly had business dealings in many of these countries, and certainly a number of countries that were not on that list. And what we're doing as security officials is we're asking ourselves, what are the risks here? And I think more importantly, what really concerns me is that a lot of these relationships were discovered by investigators. They were not disclosed by Jared Kushner or others in his sphere. So when the FBI goes back and they sit down with Jared Kushner and they say, we see you have these business dealings, we see you have these entanglements and connections, and you did not disclose them, and then the president gives Jared Kushner a security clearance. Well, from a national security perspective, that raises significant concerns about what our adversaries might do to leverage those security clearances, because Jared Kushner is someone who's so close to the president.
Sarah, just thinking back to what we played a moment ago, Maggie Haberman's really important, now even more important question to the president in that Oval Office interview about, you know, were you involved in these security clearances at all, and his denial. There's an argument over his language with Kelly, whether or not it was an order. But doesn't the fact that there even was a conversation about this matter? I mean, on top of no denial from the White House this morning, they're just saying we don't talk about security clearances.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it matters, because we've now heard everyone say, you know, 6 different ways that there was no political intervention in this process. And now it's very clear from the New York Times story there was some kind of political intervention in the process. And President Trump is allowed to do that. He is allowed to give Jared Kushner the ability to look at top secret information. But I think the reason this looks so problematic is because they lacked every kind of transparency about this. You know, they decided they were going to come out there publicly and say that Jared Kushner's security clearance was approved back in May of 2018, but now they're saying, you know, we don't talk about this. We're not going to talk about any of the potential issues or conflicts that may have arisen during his background check. We're not going to talk about the process that was actually gone through in order to get him this kind of clearance. And I think, as Sean points out, that's what makes people so uncomfortable. We don't know what the issue was that was holding this up for so long. And, you know, unless Elijah Cummings gets his way and actually subpoenas these documents, we may never get a good indication of what the sort of hang-up was in Kushner's background.
All right. Thank you. Important reporting, Sarah. We appreciate it. Sean Turner, nice to have you as well. 3 days on the Hill, apparently not enough. We've now learned Michael Cohen's going to be back testifying again next week on Capitol Hill. After 7 hours of closed-door testimony yesterday before the House Intelligence Committee, he'll return to that committee on Wednesday. With us now is Manu Raju, our senior congressional correspondent. Why? I mean, clearly they have more questions.
Yeah, they do. They want to know specifically about the White House's involvement in editing that statement that Michael Cohen initially gave back in 2017 to the same congressional committee, the House Intelligence Committee, that he later admitted to lying to about the pursuit of the Trump Tower Moscow project. At the time, he downplayed that. He said the president, then candidate Trump, wasn't really involved. The talks ended in January 2016. Well, Cohen alleged publicly that the White House attorneys or attorneys close to the president edited that statement. That's something that the attorneys themselves have denied. We expect that the Cohen attorneys will provide more documents showing the edits that occurred in that initial statement. The Democrats in particular are interested in hearing more about conversations that occurred with Michael Cohen and the president, particularly around the time of the raid of Michael Cohen's properties. What more can he disclose about that? In his public setting, he said he couldn't disclose a lot of those details because they were still under investigation from the Southern District of New York. So they're going to try to get some of those answers behind closed doors. The question is, how much can he ultimately reveal? But yeah, this will be the fourth time he's coming up to Capitol Hill before he heads to prison in the spring. Poppy.
Okay. Also, a name many people don't know, but a really interesting character, if you will, Felix Sater, and intertwined in a lot of these deals, including the Trump-Moscow, Trump Tower proposal, is Felix Sater. He's going to be testifying in 2 weeks, right?
Yeah, on March 14th before the House Intelligence Committee in an open setting, which is very rare for this committee, for Russia, witnesses in the Russia investigation. He's a Russian-born businessman who worked with the president, then businessman Trump, over a couple of different projects. He also appeared at events together with him. Trump himself in 2013 distanced himself from Felix Sater, saying he didn't know him particularly well. That was in a deposition, so expect that to be a line of questioning. But a major line of questioning, of course, will be Sater's role in the Trump Tower Moscow project. He had extensive conversations with Michael Cohen. He also at one point offered a penthouse, suggested perhaps offering a penthouse to Vladimir Putin as part of that Trump Tower Moscow project as a way to sweeten the deal of sorts. So all that will be a focus, a sign that they really want to focus on how Democrats do about the president's finances and any ties he has to Russia, business dealings with Russia. That's one reason why this will be in a public setting in March. Poppy.
All right, really interesting. Manu, thanks very much. Back in the U.S., after walking away from the talks with North Korea and back to slamming his former lawyer, Michael Cohen, that's the president this morning, the setbacks mounting for him this week. How does it play out politically? Also, Pakistan expected to release an Indian pilot after he was shot down over Kashmir. The gesture, will it ease growing tension? India just saying Pakistan's doing us no favor with this. We are on it. And lucky number 13, relatively unknown, maybe on a national stage, Democratic governor of Washington State, Jay Inslee, jumping into the 2020 race for the presidency. Will his focus on climate change set him apart from the pack? All right, President Trump might have known he was in for a bit of a rocky week with Michael Cohen scheduled to spend most of it on Capitol Hill, but he had the summit with North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un and a potential breakthrough to divert the world's attention, except that fell apart. And then Cohen's coming back for more testimony next week. And now the president reportedly has been caught in a dangerous lie about his son-in-law and the nation's most sensitive secrets. His answer so far is to lambaste Michael Cohen and Democrats in an early morning series of tweets. Let's talk about this. Errol Lewis is here, political anchor for Spectrum News. David Urban joins me, former senior advisor to the Trump campaign in 2016, informal advisor on the second go-around. Good morning to you both. David, let me begin with you. What's the high point for the president this week?
So, Poppy, listen, I think the high point is the fact that they continue to have negotiations on the Korean Peninsula. I think if you look back to where we started this all, at the beginning of this presidency, there were missiles being lobbed across the Sea of Japan, across some of our allies, and it was a very frightening place in the South China Sea, and now we haven't had a missile test or a nuclear test for over 400 days. That's a very positive thing. I don't think people recall that, everybody felt we were on the precipice of war on the Korean Peninsula, and we're far, far from that at this point.
Except the fact that if you look at the independent analysis, like what was done by Stanford University in the last year, North Korea has amassed even more fissile material to build between 5 to 7 more nuclear weapons. There's that. But Errol, to David's point, the president didn't sign or agree to a bad deal. Is that a win?
That's right. Look, a day without nuclear war is a good day, right?
There you
a day
go.
in which at least conversation is going on is a good day. The clear result that you're supposed to do this at the lower levels and then have the summit, not the other way around. Okay, he's kind of doing it his way. It's a little bit in reverse. They had a summit that failed. Now the teams will have to get together and continue some serious talks about what kind of sanctions, what kind of dialing back of the nuclear program we're going to see. And all of that is to the good. But I think there's a difference between having a good week and having an acceptable week. I think he had more of an acceptable week in the sense that he's still making some kind of progress. Again, the talks didn't completely end. It wasn't a complete catastrophe.
Right.
And even on Capitol Hill, his Republican allies stuck up for the president.
Yes.
And as ludicrous as it seemed at times, they didn't ask a single probing question about what the president's former attorney was saying. They instead just attacked him, and they did the president's bidding. That's a good thing for Donald
I wonder
Trump.
if they did, though, in those closed-door sessions with Michael Cohen. David, weigh in on that,
Poppy,
but I also want...
I was just going to say...
Go for it. Go for it.
I was going to say, as Earl points out, and you know, the State Department, Secretary Pompeo, Steve Biegun, the special envoy for North Korea, they've been working. They've been tilling the field there, working with the North Koreans, trying to get to an agreement before the president went. It's not like he was just in the neighborhood and decided to drop in. The State Department had been putting a lot of work into this.
I get it.
It didn't bear fruit, but as Earl points out, they're going to continue to talk.
They haven't. Pompeo had gone a number of times. There's a little criticism of Biegun, people saying he should have had more set before the president went in there. But I hear you. Let me ask you, though, about something else. Even those who do not see this summit as a failure, supporters of the president, David, they all seem to be pretty unanimously appalled that the president has taken the word of an autocratic leader once again when it comes to the death of the American citizen, Otto Warmbier, and his condition when he came back from North Korea. Are you appalled?
Yeah, so listen, that is incredibly regrettable. The North Korean regime, whether Kim Jong-un knew about it, the fact remains that a young American student was captured, was kidnapped, and murdered by a dictatorial regime in North Korea. And I think the president should have kind of slammed his fist down on the table on that one and said, look, we're going to hold people accountable and we're going to push to find an answer here. So I do think he should have been much stronger on that point.
Okay, on the reporting this morning from the Times and the Washington Post, Errol, the president's denial that he got involved at all in this security clearance issue with Jared Kushner, despite now contemporaneous memo we've learned from his former White House Chief of Staff, John Kelly. Should any president Bigfoot security professionals ever when it comes to this?
Clearly, there's some substantive danger to it. I think politically, it's fascinating to me that he's got all of these top aides. It reminds me of what happened when he spoke to James Comey. People come out of meetings with the president and they feel like they have to write something down and take notes about it. His chief of staff, his White House counsel, his former FBI director, people are being very clear that they're getting instructions from him, directly or indirectly, that really, really trouble them. And in this case, we don't know what substantively there might be there. Joe Johns, who reported a few minutes ago, I think was exactly right. Why is it that the FBI, why is it that they keep saying this man can't have top security clearances?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that, David Urban, but what I do know is that right now, Jared Kushner is at what seems to be a really critical point in Mideast peace negotiations.
Right.
And that makes all of this an even more important question, right?
Right. And it's been well reported that the president clearly has the authority to do this. No one is certain as what in the memos that put in the file, in the personnel file by then Chief of Staff General Kelly or White House counsel Don McGahn. So we don't know exactly what it says. So to classify those as somehow alarming memos, we don't know. They could just be simple, HR housekeeping things. And just to be very clear about clearance here, there are two specific pieces to a security clearance that I believe Jared was applying for. There's the TS portion, the top secret portion, which is done by the FBI and kind of handled inside the White House. And then there's the SCI portion, the special compartmentalized portion, which is handled by the folks at Langley and the CIA. So we don't know exactly what portion he was declined for during this entire episode. He could have been declined for the SCI portion, and the president said, well, let's just give him a TS, make sure he has a TS, because he needs that to do his work. So until everybody knows the facts, I would just tell everyone to just exhale and just I think America's still safe with Jared Kushner having a TS secret clearance.
David Urban, nice to have you. Errol Lewis, thank you both. We'll have you both back soon.
Thanks,
All
Poppy.
right. Do you care about the U.S. debt? You should. It is now $22 trillion, and in just months, the Treasury might not have the cash to pay our bills. Up next, the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors. Kevin Hassett joins me on that and a lot. $22 trillion and counting. That is our national debt, folks. It is a startling and dangerous number, and starting tomorrow, the debt ceiling kicks back in. That means the government could run out of cash to pay its bills by the fall if that limit is not increased, and that would mean a slew of negative repercussions for all of us. Joining me now, White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett, chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors. See, not that much snow, Kevin. I'm glad you were able to make it through.
But cold enough that I had to put my jacket on or coat on. I mean, I feel a little embarrassed in front of a Minnesota person dressing so warm. It's in the 30s, right?
Yeah, you should be. Exactly.
Yeah.
That is darn near tropical. On a more serious note, thank you for being here, Kevin.
Of course.
Look, on the debt ceiling issue, I mean, they've got until September 30th. Are you expecting another protracted fight in Congress over raising the debt ceiling, especially because you've got, former deficit hawk Mick Mulvaney now in there as chief of staff?
Well, I'm not the laissez-faire strategist. I'm just, the lowly economist in the White House. I can tell you that if you look back at previous debt limit debates, that they've always sort of worked out in the end, but sometimes, they've dissolved into brinksmanship.
Yeah.
I think everybody hopes that we can work together and make a positive deal and that it won't come to that. But, the end game is, as you mentioned, really far off. So that while it's almost like the whistle blows in March and then the race lasts into the early fall because of all the special measures that government can take.
And that issue, Kevin, if it does become this protracted fight, is the impact on our credit rating. I mean, last time it happened, because of that political brinksmanship, is why S&P downgraded our credit rating, which we have not gotten back yet. And that's bad for the United States. I mean, are you worried that could happen again, that we could get another downgrade?
I think that downgrade itself is highly questionable. I think that U.S. debt is about the safest asset on earth. If you look at asset prices and global debt markets, global debt markets agree. And so, in the end, these showdowns have always worked themselves out. We're absolutely hoping to work it out amicably. And it's really possible to do that sometimes. If you go back and look at the prison reform last year, when there are good ideas, then Washington can still work. And we're hoping that we could find a place like that.
Fingers crossed for it working. All right, let's talk about growth. I know you guys are really happy about it. I think America's happy about the growth number that we saw this week in terms of economic growth. You told the Wall Street Journal yesterday you think we're going to see 3% or greater growth for the year. My question to you is, what could stop that, right? What could get in the way? Namely, if a China trade deal does not come together, let's hope it does, but if it doesn't, would you still foresee 3% growth if those tariffs are ratcheted up?
Right. Well, again, the reason we see 3% growth is that the model that 16 months ago said that we'd have 3% growth in 2018 is actually saying that we're going to be a little better in 2019 than we were last year. So we're thinking maybe 3.2 this year. And that model has worked pretty well, and it's based on peer-reviewed science, and so we feel pretty good about it. Remember that last year we got 3.1, even though there was a lot of uncertainty about trade. I think if you're thinking about China and Europe and the rest, that probably the main trade risk this year is upside, that we get some really great deals, and there's a heck of a lot of celebration about new access to new markets. I think that it would look more like last year, and and the fact is that one of the reasons why President Trump has been very aggressive in trade is that we've agreed to a lot of bad deals in the past that disadvantage the United States, and so the thing is then that if you look at, say, the tariffs that we put on China, they're a much bigger consequence for China than for our economy, and so if those were to stay in place, that I don't think it would have much of a material impact on growth this year.
Okay, there are others that see it differently, but let's see what plays out here. I want to ask you about a number that doesn't get a lot of attention, but I'm fascinated by it and concerned by it. And credit to my friend Heather Long at the Washington Post, who pointed this out in her reporting. She is great. A record 7 million Americans, Kevin, are now 90 days or more delinquent on their auto loans. And these are things that people tend to pay off first: their mortgage, their rent, and their auto loan. This is 1 million more than during the financial crisis. The New York Fed economist there wrote about this a few weeks ago and said the substantial and growing number of distressed borrowers suggests that not all Americans have benefited from the strong labor market. Does it concern you, and why do you think it's happening?
Right, we're studying the auto market very, very closely. It's something that is a big part of the economy still. And you're right that the loan data are a little concerning, that there are people having trouble making their loan payments. I think that one thing, though, that you have to factor in is that the number of auto loans is at an all-time high just about, and so therefore the percentage of loans that are in default could be steady, and the number of loans that are in default could go up a lot because there's actually overall number of loans, right? And so loans in default go up with overall numbers of loans, and since there are a lot of loans because the economy is doing well, then the default rates go up too. So I think you have to be a little careful not to panic about that.
I hear you, but what the Fed is saying, the New York Fed, this is an independent body of economists. They don't have any political
really
agenda. And they're saying that it suggests that not all Americans have benefited from the strong labor market. The jobs numbers are great under this administration, right? Credit where credit's due. But they're concerned that it's not equally shared.
Right. Well, I think that we should always be concerned, whatever we do, however good it is, it's not going to affect everybody we want to help. But if you look at wage growth in the bottom decile, right now it's about 6.5%. If you look at blue-collar wages, last year weekly earnings for blue-collar workers went up by a whole of $2,500 per worker. So if you had 2 workers in a family, that's $5,000. So there's a heck of a lot of good news. Of course, it doesn't reach everybody. Certainly, people who are out of the labor force aren't necessarily benefiting from the higher wages. The one thing I could say, though, is that even there you can see that we're making progress. And so if you look at the latest jobs numbers over the last few months, 73% of the new hires came from out of the labor force. And so 3 or 4 years ago, we were worried that people were stuck out of the labor force and we're going to have a hard time ever reattaching them to the economy and to civilized society, really. And what we're seeing now is that people are coming back in droves, and that's really one of the best pieces of good news in the data right now.
So you're not too concerned about this number. A few more things to take through with you. Share buybacks. You've been very vocal on this. So Senators Schumer and Sanders, Democrats, have proposed legislation to limit how much of their shares companies can buy back unless they hit a certain threshold of investment in workers in their communities. You reacted to this, calling it, quote, economically illiterate, and you went on to say they should be ashamed of themselves. I wonder if you say the same of Senator Rubio's proposal, Republican senator, that would also limit share buybacks in terms of the tax advantage on it. It's not just Democrats.
Yeah, I will call a bad economic argument a bad economic argument regardless of who makes it. And the fact is that share buybacks are, a sign of a healthy economy. And so what happens is that, say, Apple has all this cash, they repurchase some of their shares, and then that money goes out to, say, new entrepreneurial firms that need equity capital in order to come up with the next great thing. And so it's a natural way that our economy recycles cash from sort of old successful firms to new entrepreneurial firms. And if we were to stop share buybacks or slow them down, then we would basically be slowing down the cash flow to entrepreneurs.
But Kevin, they're not saying stop
they want to
them.
slow them down with the tax.
Rubio's saying, make the tax benefit here equal to dividends, and push investment in workplaces and in employees. And Sanders and Schumer are saying, look, invest X amount in employees and communities before you do this, because as you know, looking at last year's numbers, U.S. companies announced more than $1 trillion in these buybacks, and their feeling is that it disproportionately benefits wealthy investors.
If you really want to help workers, then what you want to do is create new firms with great new jobs that have a lot of upside potential. The way you do that is you funnel money from old firms to new entrepreneurial firms. In fact, there's this whole economic literature about Europe where they talk about these zombie firms, where they're these really big firms with lots of cash that aren't sending the cash back out into capital markets, and they're leading to things like in Italy, you see total factor productivity has declined for a decade. They're calling it the great unlearning. The reason you can get such really long-run negative outcomes is you trap the money in old firms. And so it's really, really important that the firms that make money send it back out into capital markets so that the new guys, if you and I were to start a company, we'd want to issue equity, take that equity and employ people and buy new machines and create new ideas. And it's a lot harder to do that if we're locking the money in at Apple.
Kevin, let me ask you one final thing. Larry Kudlow, your colleague there, called the Green New Deal yesterday something that would, quote, literally destroy the economy. Literally destroy the economy. And I wonder if you believe that climate change is a threat to economic growth, because that national climate assessment that came out, 13 independent agencies on it, said that it would, if we don't see a change here, that it would knock 10% off U.S. GDP by 2100. What's your response?
Right. Well, I haven't modeled the Green New Deal, and so me, I'm geeky enough that I'll I'll
You'll
tell you
do
what
it.
the effects are with precision once I model it. But you go back to the early 90s as an academic economist. I was one of the first economists writing theoretical papers about carbon taxes. It's the literature that I've been involved in for a really long time. I think Nordhaus was right to get the Nobel Prize for his work, and that it's basically something that everybody should pay attention to as they think about future policy risks.
Do you think climate change is a threat to economic growth? Yes or no?
Yes. I think that Nordhaus's work, is food for thought about what could happen, and it's something that people should take seriously and think about.
Kevin Hassett, nice to have you here. I'm glad
Thanks,
to
great to be here, Poppy.
Held
Thanks
back for the most part. Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah.
Take care. All right, a dangerous border crisis is escalating between two nuclear powers, India and Pakistan. We are live next. Nuclear-armed powers. Pakistan is expected to hand over an Indian fighter pilot whose plane was shot down over the disputed border region with Kashmir. But one government leader in India this morning says Pakistan is not doing his country any favors by releasing this pilot. Sam Kiley joins me now from New Delhi. And Sam, this is much bigger than one pilot. I mean, this is 7 years of history between the two now nuclear-armed powers. What is the sense you're getting on the ground here of where this is going?
Well, Poppy, I think things have escalated very dramatically, not so much yet on a military level, although India's crossing using aircraft into Pakistan territory where they lost an aircraft and claimed to have shot down a Pakistani F-16. And this handover is dramatic in its own right. But today we also heard from Prime Minister Modi here in India saying that in future any terrorist attack that is traced back to Pakistan would be met with retaliation with interest. This is a short extract of what he said.
This is a new India. This is an India that will return the damage done by terrorists with interest.
Now, India and Pakistan, Poppy, have fought at least 3 wars over Kashmir and other territorial disputes since partition in 1947. There are bitter exchanges, dangerous exchanges of fire across the line of control inside Kashmiri territory. But this commitment by Modi, albeit in an election year, to retaliate against all and any terrorist attacks really ups the ante at a time when the Pakistanis, at least in public, under Imran Khan, the new Prime Minister there, are calling repeatedly for talks. The Pakistanis are trying to appear to be the more conciliatory, whilst the Indians are definitely taking a more robust attitude at the moment, Poppy.
Sam Kiley, thank you for being there in New Delhi, India. I know you're following all of it for us. We appreciate that. Ahead to politics in 2020, the first governor jumps in the race for the presidency. He is putting his money on climate change, betting enough people care about it could get him all the way to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Washington State Governor Jay Inslee is jumping into the 2020 race for the White House. He is the 13th official Democratic candidate, but the first governor to get in this race. He's also the first who intends to make climate change and fighting it the center of his campaign, and he is up against some serious Washington heft. A new poll out of New Hampshire shows Senator Bernie Sanders and former Vice President Joe Biden, who, by the way, has not even announced he's running yet, leading the field of candidates. Joining me now is CNN political commentator Simone Sanders. Of course, she was previously press secretary for Bernie Sanders' 2016 run. That yellow looks marvelous on you. Let me just say this morning,
Thank
Simone.
You, Poppy. I'm just trying to bring a little sunshine.
Look,
okay, it's dreary here
I
in
love
Washington,
that
D.C.
on a snowy Friday. Thank you for being here, Simone. Look, I mean, you know, it's important. Climate change is so important, but you know where it falls on Americans' list of priorities, of things they care about, of things they vote on. And so I'm interested in what your read is on Governor Inslee making that his platform.
Look, I think Governor Inslee is getting into the race, and he's trying to distinguish himself. I like to remind folks that the Democratic presidential primary is all about your delegate path. And because on the Democratic side of the aisle we have what's called proportional representation, meaning Bernie Sanders could win Iowa and Kirsten Gillibrand could come in 3rd or 4th, and she could still get a substantial number of delegates. And so this is all about who can get to the magic number. In 2016, it was 2,000 I think it was 2,383. That was the number of delegates you needed to win the Democratic nomination. And so I think what Governor Inslee is doing is he wants to be somebody who is on the voters' minds. And when you think about climate change, he wants you to think about him. Now, he will have to have other platforms. And so while climate change is his staple platform, he has to have a criminal justice platform. What is he going to do about the economy? So on and so, health care. But what is his message to black women? So I think we'll see that. And, you know, perhaps he'll be able to stand out on the debate stage. We'll find out in June.
Yeah. Right. You got to make the debate stage, but yes, indeed. Simone, look at this poll out of New Hampshire. You've got your former candidate in 2016, Bernie Sanders, topping it out there at 26%. Joe Biden, former vice president, who hasn't even announced a run, 22%. We checked after that. Coming in third is Kamala Harris, Senator Kamala Harris at 10%. You know, I feel like from the outside, Senator Sanders benefited a lot last time around, even though he didn't get the nomination, by being the underdog for so long and sort of being underestimated. He didn't have to face as much Oppo research, etc. Now he's leading the pack. Does that bring with it a host of new challenges?
It does. And I mean, you have to run differently. If I am advising a 2020 candidate, which I'm not at this time, and my person was polling at the bottom of the pack in New Hampshire right now, at the bottom of the pack in South Carolina, I'd be okay. We don't want to peak too early, because the earlier you peak, you open yourself up for criticism and to be a target. I mean, lots of people view Kamala Harris as a front runner right now, and she's getting a lot of what the young people would call smoke, Poppy. Lots of people are digging deep into her record and pulling things out. So look, I think what you see right now in that polling is literally about name recognition, though. That's why Vice President Joe Biden is polling so high. Bernie Sanders is polling so high. The voters know them, and from what they know, they seem to like them in New Hampshire. Those polls could look drastically different come December 2019 and definitely January 2020. And so,
you mean,
yeah,
you mean,
I mean,
I was just going to say, you mean you can win the presidency even if the polls don't look like you can?
Even if the polls don't look like you can. Shocker.
What do you make of this brouhaha? Some are upset about former Vice President Joe Biden calling current Vice President Mike Pence decent.
Well, those wouldn't be the words I would use to describe current Vice President Mike Pence. Look, I think what folks need to understand about Vice President Joe Biden is that he has built himself as a consensus builder. He has worked across the aisle. A number of these folks, he speaks so highly of Mike Pence because he served with him. He knew Mike Pence. So I don't know if that will play well with this new young crop of potential voters who are looking for a Democratic nominee that's not necessarily willing to hug the current folks that occupy the White House. But it remains to be seen. We don't know.
One thing finally, very quickly, that really interests me is that Senator Sanders has not said that he's just running for one term, for example. And Vice President Joe Biden, if he gets in, I don't know if he's going to do that. But I just wonder if you think that that would actually be an advantage for one of them to say, you know, age, obviously consideration, but also I'm just going to run for one term to govern, not to run again.
I don't think we'll hear Vice President Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders say that for multiple reasons, but I think namely of which is that they both really want to be president, I think. If Joe Biden gets into the race, he gets into the race because he wants to be president of the United States. Bernie Sanders is running because he wants to be president of the United States. Concurrently, I think Kirsten Gillibrand, Cory Booker, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, they all want to be president. Governor Inslee. So, if I was advising somebody, we're not saying we're getting in just to be a one and done. I'm getting in because I think I can be the best. My candidate can be the best choice out there, and we want to be president, and we want to be president for as long as legally allowed possible. So,
all right,
2 terms.
Simone Sanders, thanks for bringing the sunshine this morning. Good to have you. New reports of President Trump dismissed the objections of senior intelligence officials, his senior staff, and ordered his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, to be given top-secret security clearance. Now some members of Congress want answers and documents. They're threatening a subpoena.